Have you tried using the new asset spawning feature? This week, we had a request to show you how you can make a button that spawns and attaches a random asset to a player. Let me show you how we can do that. To start off, we'll pull out a new script gizmo and a new trigger gizmo, placing the trigger on this button. We can now rename the script attach button, and from the trigger's bottom right, we can add the script. From the variables tab, we will create a new asset variable called asset list, making sure to check the list toggle. We will also create a few asset variables like address and robot legs. Now when world is started, we can add these items to the list from the bottom of the operators tab. Bring over add to list, placing the item on the left and the list variable on the right. You can have as many of these options as you want. Just duplicate for more. Now the next thing to think about is when does this thing we want to have happen occur? In our case, it is when a player puts their hand in the trigger, and since our script is running on the trigger, we receive this event by default. Let's drag over the when trigger is entered by player event. Now we only want one player to use the button at a time, so on our Actions tab, we will bring over Set Trigger Detection and set Self-Detection to False. We will re-enable this in a moment. The next thing we need to do is save the player for later. We can do this by going to our Variables tab and creating a new player ID variable called Current Player. Then our Values tab, bring over Set To and place Current Player on the left, dragging the player pill to the right. Now it's time to spawn a random asset. From the Actions tab, bring over Spawn Asset. We can then go to the bottom of the Operators tab and bring over Get Item from List. And because we want it to be random, scroll up and grab random number, placing this into the index pill slot. We can then scroll back down to the list and put length of list into the right side and grab the number value input from our values tab and place 0 on the left. Then we can drop the asset list pill into both empty list slots. Now our script spawns a random attachable object to 0, 0, 0 and sends my event to self when the object is finished being spawned, which is actually our next step. So let's go to the top of our events tab, bring over when event is received. It is also set to my event by default. We could rename this, but we will leave it as is for now. Because this event is received with an object parameter, we need to click new parameter. Select object and we'll call this new asset spawned. The name is just for reference. Back on our Actions tab, we can grab the attach object code block, dragging the new asset spawn pill into it. Also, duplicating the current player pill in and drop down to select torso. If we want to attach to head, I recommend creating a second button for objects like crowns and sunglasses. Now we can re-enable the trigger. Grab the code block from above and thumbstick to the right to duplicate here. And when you let it go, it returns back to where we got it. Now we can toggle the Boolean to true, which will enable the trigger to detect players again. Now we could stop there, but likely you'll want to allow the player to swap clothing options when they press the button again. We also don't want our world to go over capacity, so despawning is pretty important. To do this, we will start by creating two list variables. One is a player ID list called PLID list or player ID list, and the other is an object list called parallel asset objects. Now, if this all seems scary, totally get that. Cue horror music, dun dun dun. But no, I'll do my best to show you how everything here works. The idea is that we will store player IDs in parallel to the object that is attached to the player. But first, we need to know if the player is wearing an object. So on our Events tab, bring over an if block. Heading to Operators at the top, grab not. This inverts a Boolean value from true to false or vice versa. Then, at the bottom of the operators, we can check if a player is in a list with the list contains item code block. We then place the PLID list on the left and the current player pill on the right. And now we are saying if the player is not in the list, what do we do? And so we'll grab the add to list code block, making sure to indent it into the if. You'll notice this white bar here shows you where it will be placed. After letting go, we can duplicate in our current player and PLID list variables into the respective slots. And now that the player has been added to the list, we also want to do this for the object. So let's bring over another add to list code block and drag down the new asset spawned pill, as well as getting the parallel asset objects list from the variables tab. Fantastic! Now we have stored the player and the asset to be utilized later. But what if the player is already in the list? That's where else comes into play. You'll find this under if, and we can place this at the bottom, making sure it is not indented. And in this case, we want to despawn the previous spawned asset. We can grab the code block from the Actions tab. Now the item we want to delete is the one in parallel to our player, as we may have many players all with variable objects. Back on our Operators tab, grab Get Item From List. We can drop the parallel object list on the far right. And the index of our object is in the index of the player in the PLID list because the lists are kept in parallel. We can then get that index using the Get Index of Item in List code block, placing current player and PLID list into it. Now we have deleted the previously spawned objects, but this does not remove it from the list, so we have to update this with the new object that was spawned. To do that, bring over the set value at index in the list code block, and we can drag it in the new asset spawn pill in the parallel asset objects list. And then for the index, we can duplicate down the get index for current player in PLID list. Great work! We could stop here, but we won't, because we always want to think about the full picture. And imagine dozens of users are coming through your world. What happens when they leave? This is where we'll bring over the When Player Exits World event. Now, we only want to affect the players who have objects spawned, so we'll bring over another if block and duplicate down the PLID list contains current player. We will need to swap current player with the player pill that comes with the world exit event. One more cool trick we'll show you today is how to make your scripts easier to read and also slightly more efficient. We'll create a new variable called current object, which I've abbreviated, and then grab the set to from the top of the valuables tab, making sure to indent it again. We can then place current object on the left, and you'll remember we got the current object earlier. So let's duplicate down the get item from parallel asset object list. We can then swap out current player for player. And now we can use this in a couple spots, like check this out. Back on our Actions tab, bring over the Delete Spawn Asset code block and simply duplicate the current object pill in. Nice, but it doesn't stop here. On the bottom of our Operators tab, bring over 2 of the Remove Item from List. We can then place the player and current object on the left of each of these and also place their respective list variables on the right. And just like that, we are done with the script. Our last step is to tie in our assets. You'll see we can go to our assets library and each of our assets has a spawn pill next to it. We can then reference that at the bottom of our script to the 3 assets we defined earlier. Now let's try it out. How cool is that? I'm so excited to use this in all of my worlds to enable players to customize their look while exploring. Huge congratulations. This is a really awesome first step to utilizing the power of the asset spawning feature. Please note, for this to work, you will need to reserve some of your world's capacity to be able to spawn these attachables in, otherwise they will not be spawned. To get you inspired, here are a few other ways we've seen asset spawning being used. Maze generation, storing items in a bag, basketball spawning, random creature spawning, and even creating various dungeon maps. Really can't wait to see all the creative ways that you'll take advantage of this awesome new tool. We'll see you in Horizon!